Thanks, Cathaoirleach. So this question, Minister, is in relation to domestic violence. You kind of touched on this yesterday in committee, so I'm aware of that. But just to ask what support your department has given in terms of personnel, expertise and resources to the Minister for Justice in order that she can fulfil her duties in regard to supporting victims of domestic violence, and if you can make a statement on the matter. Thanks.
Deputy. So, as you know, the Government has made it clear that addressing domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is a key priority for us all. And this involves a number of Government departments working collaboratively, particularly my own department and that of the Minister for Justice, Minister McEntee. And in that department, many positive steps have been made in the fight against domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The launch of Zero Tolerance, the third National Strategy on Domestic, Sexual and Gender-based Violence, and the push to establish a new agency under the remit of the Department of Justice to tackle such forms of violence. My department established a comprehensive tri-party memorandum of understanding with TUSLA and the Department of Justice. And this MOU and related documents outline the various engagements at all levels up to and including ministerial and CEO level between the three bodies to help us ensure the continued operation of DSGBV services through TUSLA during the transition. So with the significant support from my department and TUSLA, the Department of Justice has engaged in an ambitious programme aiming to firstly establish a statutory DSGBV agency by January 2024 that will be under the remit of the Department of Justice. Secondly, to manage that transition to the new agency of the existing domestic, sexual and gender-based violence services that are currently provided by TUSLA. And thirdly, to progress the recommendations of the Interdepartmental Group on the provision of accommodation for victims of DSGBV during the transition period and in advance of the formation of the agency. So my department and my officials are very much engaged in this process. Just in terms of funding, Deputy, the recent budget had many competing priorities within my department. I specifically secured an additional €37 million for TUSLA, and I'm currently preparing the performance statement for the TUSLA business plan for 2023. But just to say that Minister McEntee secured an additional €7 million for TUSLA specifically for DSGBV services. So a very significant amount of investment, but also the zero tolerance strategy setting out how we're going to move to this agency and also move a wider range of measures to tackle DSGBV in the country.
Deputy Funchion.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Thanks, Minister. Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that, because I was wondering, I think I actually referenced that in the budget speech the time that we were replying to the budget, that what exactly was the extra. So it's 7 million, which is very welcome. And is there, I think maybe there isn't yet, but is there a breakdown in relation to, is that just, I don't mean just, that's probably the wrong words, but in relation to obviously refuge space and, you know, additional income for you know, refuges, like for example, the one that I regularly talk about, our own one in Kilkenny, Amber, which actually Minister Helen McEntee was there just a few weeks ago, about a month ago. So, because I think there's two parts to that I always reference. One is the counselling and how important that part of it is. And then in relation to the zero tolerance strategy, I think that is absolutely vital to all of this, because we're never going to get to the end of why these situations keep happening unless, you know, as a society we sort of look at it and adopt that kind of an approach. I'll come back in then.
Thanks, Deputy. Well, over the previous two budgets, I'd secured specific increases for TUSLA directed directly to DSGBV services. As you know, the Government has made the decision now that these services will move out of TUSLA to the new agency, and in advance of that, Justice now has responsibility for that part of TUSLA's operation, and that's done through a memorandum of understanding. So Minister McEntee was very successful in securing 7 million to support those services. Now, my understanding, and look, I'm open to correction on this, but my understanding is that's current funding. So she's also working on a capital programme as well, and particularly better activating CAS, the Capital Assistance Scheme in the Department of Housing, and making it easier for services to be able to access that, because we have found it takes a very long time, takes too long for a DSGBV NGO or an approved housing body to actually be able to draw down that and deliver the new accommodation, the new refuge service. So a lot of work has been done in simplifying that process, and Minister McEntee has set out a plan for the development of new refuge space around the country, which is much needed.
Minister, yeah, I would agree with a lot of the sentiment there, particularly in relation to the housing part of it. And to be honest, that is why so many people stay in these toxic relationships and stay living with domestic violence, because it's so difficult, particularly at the moment. Where do you even go, even if you can find a rented property, which is nearly impossible? And then there's always difficulties around if your name's on a property and all of the complexities of that. And I find that's very much depends on who you meet on the day in housing, and if they're sort of kind of open to hearing your case as such. I welcome, and I said that before previously, I think it's good that it's going to be in the Department of Justice. That's the correct department for it, and that there's one agency. I wanted to very briefly mention a fund that I only became aware of last year that was done through Safe Ireland, and it was actually just for women to be able to access lots of different services, like if it was even that they had finally found a property where they needed help maybe with a fill of oil. It was nearly like a community welfare type payment, but done through Safe Ireland. I know that there was huge demand on it, but it was very successful. You may not have the answer to that now, but I'm just wondering, could that be looked at again in kind of administering a similar fund again? Thanks, Cathleen.
Thanks, Debbie. I don't have the answer on the fund, but look, I know Minister McEntee works very closely with the NGOs, as I did when it fell within my remit, in terms of listening to them and working to support their actions and their expertise and their knowledge on the ground. I think what you're saying in terms of just on refuges and particularly just the real pressure there is really important. I suppose just worth highlighting two things: the work we were discussing yesterday and again today in terms of the work-life balance bill, the new paid 5 days paid domestic violence leave. That's an important support, recognising that the victims of DSGBV are also very likely to fall into poverty, and to provide them with some income support when they are moving or receiving services needed as a result of the violence they've experienced. I also know, though, that Minister McEntee is looking at how we can change laws to ensure that the victim remains in the house and it's the perpetrator who actually leaves. And I know Minister McEntee that's a priority for her as well.